ladies and gentlemen, friends. I'm really delighted to welcome you all, the delegates, the speakers this evening. A wonderful encounter is picking up this evening here at Max Mueller Bhavan. Today we are at the library, tomorrow we go down to the gallery space where we have a little bit more space, but I felt it is a good thing to start the keynotes in this more intimate library room tonight. We have a wonderful evening ahead now, the opening. We have Professor Akhil Bilgrami from Columbia University, New York, well known to the city. He was educated in Bombay, a real Bombay child. He received his bachelor very close by at Elphinstone College in English literature, then moved on to Oxford, studied in the field and was teaching in the field of philosophy, politics and economics. He received his PhD at Chicago University and is now Sidney Morgenbesser Professor of Philosophy at Columbia, and he's also professor on the Committee on Global Thought. So you are definitely most qualified for this evening talk. He was also, Professor Bilgrami, involved in the HKW, in the House of Culture, Anthropocene opening some years back. We are very happy that you made it from New York extra to come here to Bombay to join this conference. Important publications of Professor Bilgrami are Belief and Meaning, Self-Knowledge and Resentment, and Secularism, Identity and Enchantment. He works currently also extensively on Gandhi and about the question, what is a Muslim? So welcome, Akhil. Then we have another very eminent speaker, friend, colleague of mine since many, many years. And I'm very delighted to welcome Dr. Bernd Scherer from Berlin. He is the head, the director, or as we say in German, the Intendant of the House of Cultures of the World, Haus der Kulturen der Welt, since 12, 13 years now already. He started his career as a philosopher. He is equally a philosopher like Akhil, so we will have a philosophical session in many ways, I expect. Bernd Scherer, then after passing his PhD with Professor Kuno Lorenz in Saarbrücken, he joined the Goethe-Institut and was actually my predecessor at the Goethe-Institut in Karachi, and I had never such an intense and lively handover of an institute like with Bernd. It is unforgettable. I just found the booklet I wrote, I think almost 100 pages. He conveyed to me what I have to do or not to do. And and then from there he started his career already quite early with the House of Cultures in the World, and he was working in the department from 94 to 96 of Humanities. Then he became deputy director from 96 to 99. And then he decided to return to the Goethe-Institut and was a director and regional director in Mexico City for many years. Then he returned as head of the cultural department to our head office in Munich. He didn't want to stay too long there. After 2 years, he took or even only 1 year, he took the opportunity to become the director of this incredible House of Cultures of the World in Berlin. And since then, he is heading it, and hopefully for many more years. He is also a honorary professor since 2011 at the Humboldt University Institute for European Ethnology. And to close the introduction, he is one of the main figures and agents of doing this colossal Anthropocene project of the HKW. Many of our friends sitting here tonight have encountered Bernd in Berlin, were invited also from India. So we have great competence with Bernd here for this conference, and thank you very much for coming, Bernd. Why is the Goethe-Institut Max Mueller Bhavan doing this event? I don't want to give now a Goethe conceptual strategy paper intro, but just mention that environment, the relation of man and nature and the planet is a focus issue of the Goethe-Institut worldwide. And also in South Asia, maybe we have been not overactive, but we have some significant projects done, like in Delhi, the Yamuna Elbe project, quite some years back now, but it left significant memories. And our dear colleague, Helmut from Chennai, is embracing since longer the rivers in Chennai and has also set up a huge project over years. And he is also among us. I'm delighted to have you as a colleague and interested person in these issues here, and you will also definitely contribute to the discussion with your experiences. Of course, there is one person in this auditorium who needs a special mentioning. That's Ravi Agarwal. With him, we conceptualized this conference. With him, the Goethe-Institut in Delhi, also in Chennai and other places, interacted on conceptualizing projects related to our topic. And I must say it is a wonderful experience to work with Ravi, to pull in all his expertise, his networks. And it's great that you are here, Ravi. Warm welcome. And we in Mumbai had not such a strong focus on the environment, but there was one very significant exhibition 2 years ago. We had Amar Kanwar's Sovereign Forests shown in the gallery, and for me this was a kind of eye-opener in the extremely complex situation in India. This is not an exhibition simply just on environmental issues. It's much, much more. I would even not call it an exhibition. It is maybe more a kind like an academy, like a school where you go, you can study, you can do research and try to understand on very different levels and presentation formats the situation in India, the relationship of economy, the activists, the displaced people. So it's a long story, but this is somehow also background for my foil for our undertaking this conference with this background of Amar's great work. The conference ahead, the state of nature in India, for me has a slightly also frightening subject because of its enormous complexity. I have to admit, it makes me feeling not at ease. How can we hit in the coming days a Gordian knot in a few hours ahead and approach the colossal complexity in asking for the state of nature in India, which is definitely deeply connected with the global scenario? What can we specifically learn from India? Is for me personally also important questions, the culture and the history of dealing with nature in India. We had just a cruel reminder of the devastating flood disasters in Kerala again, and so we see what happens when nature takes its course and strikes back. So there is a very contemporary crisis going on. And I asked myself how to tackle such a topic without getting lost in many monologues and theoretical systems, and getting into a real dialogue of understanding and asking the right questions. I think one has to approach the topic of this conference on a humble ground and work a lot on clarification, language as much as possible. We have present at this conference esteemed philosophers, lawyers, artists, filmmakers, scientists, writers, coming from very different backgrounds and with very different experiences to talk about nature, deliberately, I would say, because we want to establish a platform which brings people together who are involved in various disciplines, have different knowledge bases, and yet need to try to find a shared language which brings the agenda of this conference forward. A very tedious task, I guess. Outcome is uncertain. So it's an adventurous thing we try in a very short time. The conference is very much aiming to create, that's not so modest, new forms of shared knowledge, a mini lab of possible future society, trying to achieve a transformation in thinking about man and nature on a local and also with a global dimension. As I wrote in the intro here, the idea for this conference was in part inspired by the Anthropocene curriculum developed by Berlin-based institutes like especially the HKW, the House of Cultures, and the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. However, on closer examination, we felt that there was a necessity to explore the idea from a local Indian view also, and not to get already in constraints of a certain theoretical framework. Hence, the structure of the conference lends itself to deeper exploration of the ecology and also offers a critical examination of the Anthropocene in the Indian context. The state of nature is also very much, I think, a discourse on the state of the human mind, of human thinking and acting in science and the humanities, the state of values, the state of forgetting, the state of public discourse about the state of social injustice and equality, about the state of power, the state of violence, and the state of capital. That's quite a collection, yeah? But all these things, I think, impact the state of nature. There needs to be a very basic and fundamental reconsideration about what went terribly wrong and is still going wrong when we analyze and see how humans look and interact with nature. This requires new reflections, a new, I would now use a philosophical term, ontology to define the human and the nature. Is there a fundamental misunderstanding in the positioning of the human mind in nature? A kind of super subjectivity and ego which is encapsulated in its unlimited power to constitute the world and created a deep alienation of the nature we live in as an object. A natural resource we can exploit, we can objectify, Heidegger uses the word verdinglichen here, and calculate, generating a science of submersion in order to exploit, in the philosophy of utilitarianism, our natural resource in the air we breathe, the water we drink. How do we define the human, and are we the nature ourselves? Can we radically change and rethink and give it a new grammar in our language, in our everyday life? A fatal dualism in the thinking of man and nature was established in the period of enlightenment, which trickled down to our practices in our everyday life world till today. also very much related to the misunderstanding of nature as an endless resource we can exploit for economic growth and profit. I think our two keynote speakers today will touch upon these questions. Once upon a time, when nature was embedded in the religious life forms sacred in India and elsewhere, it did not serve the vast interests of capital. Later, after the committed sins, nature was also in a counter-movement, an enchanted, mystified entity, for example, in Germany, in the Romantic movement, mirroring the soul of human beings in nature. For example, the relation of Germans to the forests is still very much impregnated by the Romantic movement in Germany and the Green movement. And we have a fabulous book by a forest expert writing on trees and how they communicate and help each other, like human beings. This is translated now into 40 languages. So it's a typical German result, I think, of this relationship, which emerged very much with the Romantic movement. But I feel there is another vital dimension. I'm sure we will also touch upon this. It is a question of modern capitalism and its utopian thinking to be a sustainable form of global life also in future. The current liberal capitalism generates a world of divide and treating nature as a profiting commodity. We observe a growing inequality. We need, I think, a new post-capitalistic thinking which stops the decline of nature and social or fabrics of society. The rich get richer and the poor poorer. The social economic divide increases dramatically and hand in hand the dislocation of the poor. The global economy has dislocated huge populations from their traditional life worlds. Several dreams to distribute wealth have collapsed in the 20th century. On the other side, the accumulation of capital in the hand of a few remains an obstacle for all democracies. The question for the common good, is as urgent as never before. How can it be embedded in a fair sharing of society? And I do think that nature and natural resources are common to be shared in solidarity. Only if we can create a new form of post-capitalist thinking and acting, we can overcome the deep crisis of nature and environment and the human species entangled. We need a new ethics of care, which engages in shared interests, putting individual interests behind. We need an empowerment of the society against the alliance of corporates, capital, and state. Cooperative thinking and many NGOs of the civil society are a good example. They exist already very much in India and elsewhere. And the role of the state will be to organize solidarity. Such an emancipatory process is fundamental for a post-capitalist society and for rebuilding a new relation with nature. It means to give up the growth ideology at all cost and goes for degrowth and redefining the needs. It is about the transformation of the everyday practices in society and the mental states behind it. This social change will be a struggle against the powers of those in power who do not want a change, who think they are not part of global environmental crisis and exit the Treaty of Paris, for example, and abandon solidarity to make the last profits before the ship will sink. So that's my short resume. Most welcome now to the keynotes. Thank you for your attention and for coming to this conference. And I would like at the end to thank my dear colleague Amruta Nemiwand and also Falguni, who is in charge of communication, and all the staff members of the Goethe-Institut who worked very hard to make this event possible and a success. Thank you.
Good evening. Akhil asked me to speak first, so I follow his wish, of course. And of course, I would like to thank Martin Wälde and Ravi Agarwal for this wonderful invitation to this important conference. It's for me an opportunity to come to the Indian subcontinent, but also to meet some old friends and new friends too. Secondly, and as always, when Martin introduces the theme, he covers already the ground. So he touches a lot of issues which will come up in my talk too. But I have to warn you, I'm not speaking in a strict sense on India, neither do I speak in a strict sense on nature. Nevertheless, I will develop an argument which touches the state of nature in India from a specific perspective. And of course, this event gives me the chance in the next days to listen to many different perspectives from the subcontinent itself, which are very important also in the context of the Anthropocene project we are pursuing, because after the conceptual development of some aspects of the Anthropocene, it becomes now very important to contextualize, to localize the phenomena, because one major point, perhaps we come to that in the discussion later on, of the Anthropocene is that it forces us to work on and to think also on different scales, local scales, regional scales, but also global planetary scales. I think that is one of the major conceptual and intellectual challenges of the Anthropocene, that it's not good enough to just stay in the local, in a traditional way, neither it's good enough to stay on a global scale, but really to be able to navigate between these scales. Okay, having said all this, I'm going to start with my talk. Shortly after the hurricane season in the US last year, the artist Tito Steil pointed to a seemingly paradoxical situation. She posed the question, where is ground control? Her answer was Houston, Texas. For Steil, the city, flooded by Hurricane Harvey at the beginning of September 2017, presents an image which illustrates the fundamental problem. It is the location of the Mission Control Center, which coordinates NASA's manned space flights, and the center of the oil industry, which fueled the 20th century like no other. And this entire world, with its highly sophisticated technological and scientific infrastructure, is put out of action by a storm, the size of which, in all probability, is a consequence of global warming, which itself is a product of this technical industrial Houston system, you can say. How could it come to this? The answer to this question takes us to a location close to Mexico City at the turn of the millennium. It was here that Earth system scientists met for a conference of the International Geosphere-Biosphere Program. As talk repeatedly returned to the Holocene, the geological age still valid at the time, Paul Crutzen, the atmospheric chemist, largely responsible for explaining the ozone, for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize, suddenly stood up and said, "Stop using the word Holocene. We are not in the Holocene anymore. We are in the Anthropocene." Crutzen was clearly having problems delivering the final sentence and finding the right word. What happened? What occasioned one of the most important scientists of our age to struggle for words and finally to proclaim a new epoch, a new Earth epoch? A few years later, scientists from the IGBP presented curve diagrams depicting the essential parameter of the Earth systems, from population growth and the rise in gross domestic product, the construction of dams, water consumption, the increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and plastic production, through to the shrinking of the rainforests and biodiversity. All these curves had a similar shape. They rise from the time scale beginning in the middle of the 20th century. The curves point to a dramatic development. Earth system scientists refer to this as the big acceleration. As all the curves can be traced back to developments triggered by humans, the term Anthropocene appeared to be especially appropriate to Kulturen as a name for this epoch. So basically, all the curves were indicating that major parameters of the Earth system are transformed by humans. They are not anymore intervening here and there in local levels in nature. They are transforming the whole planet. Humankind has become the greatest natural force. It not only intervenes in nature, it changes the planet. Human history becomes planetary history. What made it possible for humans to generate energies which have enabled planetary transformations? This was possible on the one side as a result of the planet's accumulated deep time entering the now of mankind in the form of fossil fuels such as coal and oil. Here the oil refinery can serve as an illustration. It transforms the fossil raw product, which the planet has manufactured over millions of years as a result of biochemical processes and pressure, into forms of energy which powers our mobility. So there were long natural processes going over millions of years to produce this kind of energy, which now is being transformed by humans. An immense compression of time has occurred. Planetary time is being transformed into human time. This example makes it clear how technologies contribute to the planetary transformation of the world. How do these technologies change our world? Generally, technologies serve the function of transforming a state A into a state B without one having to think about it. This is the nice thing with technologies. They function from one to one and you don't have to think about it, you just use it. Our everyday routines are now saturated with such technologies. We turn the light on without having to think about where the energy is coming from. We drive a car without knowing how a motor functions. We fly without understanding how an airplane takes off. We communicate with the whole world via the internet without knowing the algorithms that makes this possible. Huge planetary infrastructures have been created around these activities, from gas and oil pipelines, freeways and airports, to continental electricity and data networks. These infrastructures form the nature of the Anthropocene world. So there is a new nature. Without these technologies, life as we know it would no longer be possible. We only need imagine what would happen, and now I speak from a German perspective, maybe it's a bit different in India. We only need imagine what would happen in the event of a weeks-long power failure during wintertime. This development can be summarized in the following thesis. During the transformation of the planet, the main goal of human activity is the creation of a second nature created by humankind through technology. The development of this technosphere, as it is sometimes called, is accompanied by the economization of society, as a result of which human activity itself is commodified. It's not just nature which is anymore commodified, but also human activity itself, namely as a saleable and purchasable commodity, and thus further naturalized. So we start to naturalize human beings. This economization can also be regarded as a technology, whose modus operandi can be demonstrated using the example of money. Money is, so to say, the concept behind money is to say a precursor to what is happening at the moment. The monetary economy is a precursor to other disruptive technologies, disruptives of today, which drive the dynamics of the Anthropocene and have reached their zenith in the financial economy we know today. The monetary economy is disruptive with regard to time, since it makes it possible to make the future available as a resource through the loans of the present. So we are consuming the future already now. Only thus can the major infrastructures be funded in the first place. But it is also disruptive in that it connects various areas from completely different categories. Using money, inventions, discoveries, or cultural achievements, but also houses, trees, and other objects can be compared in the broadest sense because they have similarly monetary values. So money in itself is a technology of abstraction. In this abstraction process, aimed at equal treatment as a result of equal monetary values, cultural acts themselves become objects and are therefore naturalized. Abstraction processes like these are also fundamental to the use of digital technologies, whose disruptive nature further fuels the dynamics of the Anthropocene. I give an example. In the US, a father of a teenage daughter some years ago discovered that she was pregnant on the basis of the advertising that she received from the chain store Target. Target had developed a new method of consumer tracking with the statistic genius Andrew Pohl. Pohl identified 25 products which, if women showed an interest in them, indicated that they were pregnant. Target used this information to send coupons to pregnant women who were in the process of changing their lifestyles and thus their purchasing behavior due to pregnancy. What was happening here? A certain phase in a person's life, which is characterized by different emotions, hopes, lived partnerships, etc., has been reduced to 25 products in order to establish a correlation between this life and a chain store's retail products. The information, and I have to add, the Target chain was correct. I mean, the daughter was pregnant, the father didn't know. The information is not just abstracted from a complex life context, but is also, and this is deciphered, injected into it again, exercising its influence. Characteristics of human subjectivity and commodity attributes are fused together. The disruptive developments which are constantly being referred to occur on a daily basis by means of the algorithms. Subjective experiences are forever being transformed into objects, sales models turn feeling into goods, and people begin to place more trust in the data they are fed than their own experiences. So these data are interfering in your thinking of individuals, of communities, we are going to see in a minute. Thus, in everyday life, our view of the world is transformed through the daily interactions with machines controlled by algorithms. And they are completely playing with our categories we are used to understand our own life. Cyberspace is not a world alongside the real world. Instead, it increasingly interacts with it, penetrating even deeper layers of our social and psychological life. The extent to which the virtual world has already been diffused into the real world and the confusion it has caused can be illustrated through the example of how people are being radicalized via the internet. And this is a story which is quite common in Central Europe at the moment. Time and again, we encounter instances of otherwise innocent citizens issuing online death threats to politicians on account of refugee politics. Closer examination of these cases often reveals that the citizens in question intended to consult the internet for information, but happened on violent scenes. The respective algorithm registered the click behavior and offered more and more of these videos, sometimes featuring even more extreme forms of violence. The users in question were quickly swallowed up by a world of violence, evoked through the pictorial language of the algorithm, which had begun to replace the real world in their heads. And they become radicalized by this. It is crucial to note here that the algorithm itself has no significance. It is merely syntax. Yet simply through a quantified register, it creates connections which not only are of significance, but which also generates their own pragmatics by intervening into reality. The algorithm, it could be argued, is developing its own role as a player and is creating a new natural environment to the viewers. The paradoxes of knowledge are becoming paradoxes of life in a very precise sense. In classical philosophy, paradoxes arise because of lack of categories with which to understand the world. Today, as the target example demonstrates, we are confronted with problems in life because a man-made computer generates a section of the world in which objective and subjective categories are completely mixed up. It is important to realize that these technologies form the basis for the planet-wide removal of local limits to human modes of acting and experiencing within the Anthropocene. They are the response to the leaps in scale, which enable, for example, huge quantities of energies to be released at the press of a button, or companies and production processes to be controlled globally. So they are at the heart of they drive the infrastructures of the Anthropocene. At the same time, however, the production of knowledge in the sciences is itself being subjected to the aforementioned processes of economization and naturalization. One procedure is standardization, aimed at making various scientific products comparable. The standards turn research into a product. This is deliberate too, since this product can then be assigned a numerical value, which can ultimately also be an economic value. On the one hand, this development facilitates the control of these processes by bureaucrats, which do not even need to understand the individual process. On the other hand, the product can then be marketed as an item of knowledge. The less thought has to be put into their use, the greater their benefit. In other words, the more they are incorporated into natural processes. Yet, they also have a far-reaching social, political, and economical consequences. And I'm very happy that Martin Wälde, that the issue of the state of nature is not just the issue of nature in a narrow sense, but of the whole complex of society around it. All that is required to develop and regulate the infrastructures is a small number, the infrastructures of the Anthropocene I have mentioned, is a small number of highly creative people. However, everyone is affected by their application. This latter group of people, the majority, becomes the objects of the Anthropocene's world production, with an increasing proportion of their actions becoming naturalized through the advanced technologies of the creative service providers. Economically, this represents an accumulation of power in the hands of those who control the infrastructure, whether it is physical or virtual. Politically, this represents the disenfranchisement of the majority who are no longer permitted to participate in the decisions of the developments which shapes their lives. The very lives of this majority are becoming part of complex technological control processes. Governance replaces politics, and we are seeing that already since 20 years. That politics is taken over by governance, and quite often you get then people from the becoming politicians. The smooth control of social processes increasingly replaces political discussion about society. Empowered citizens are displaced by experts. The control of societies by technocracies and commercial enterprises is made possible by the increasing naturalization of social processes and their availability in the form of data. This naturalization and associated disenfranchisement of large sections of society as a consequence of the delimitation, the planetarization of human activity, is a deeper reason for the prevailing dissatisfaction in societies. When people feel more and more that they are not anymore agents defining their life, but are objects of external processes. Thus understood, the Anthropocene not only refers to the aforementioned phenomena such as climate change, the decline in biodiversity, etc. More significantly, it stands for a fundamental paradigm shift in our understanding of the world and humankind, of nature and culture. It's a conceptual shift which is taking place here. As a result, the apparently clear dividing line between nature and culture is giving way to a dynamic interweaving of cultural and natural processes, a development which is now manifesting itself in the increasing naturalization of various areas of human life. Knowledge of the world is being replaced by navigation processes in which world construction and world knowledge continually interacts. These processes can no longer be solely grasped by scientific disciplines, themselves defined by demarcations. In this sense, for example, the sharp divide between the humanities and the natural sciences is dissolving. The answer to this question, what is to be done? That is the question, of course. And there are, of course, several answers to that. I just will outline one. The answer to this question can begin with a remark by the scientist Richard Feynman, which is repeated time and again by synthetic biologists. Quote, "What I cannot create, I do not understand." On the one hand, this sentence is correct, while on the other, it harbors a fundamental problem. Feynman is right insofar as a genuinely new knowledge that goes beyond the existing frame of reference can only be created on the basis of changed practices. In this sense, neither discussions about the new knowledge led us any further, nor can innovation be simply categorized. The problem with this remark is that we live in times when the pressure to innovate is so great that the ability to make something all too quickly leads to a de facto level manufacturing. This means production in the name of science often inadvertently leads to the transformation of reality. A new technology is founded on the facticity of manufacturability. The question of normativity is not anymore asked. Do we want that? When we can do it, we do it. We don't have to ask, should we do it? And normativity, of course, can be only negotiated in a societal discourse. But governments, as well as big business, are not anymore interested in public discourse. And what they do is they provide society with consumer goods. The consumer goods are replacing, so to say, the needs discussions for public discourses about what way to go. Another problem arises during the translation of new technology into society. The new technologies, for example, in the field of synthetic biology or digitalization, with social and individual lives, what I already showed to some extent, the new reality exists not only in a new technological object, but also in a complex arrangement of objects, behavior, etc. Let's take the example of a health app that records and communicates all data relevant to health. These data can, and data are always objectified processes, are supposed to change the behavior of the person in question. That person's view of himself or herself changes. Facts and figures relating to certain parameters complement and or contradict feelings and perceptions. The data are collected by health insurance providers. They led to product developments in the field of health, maybe even to changes in how we understand the terms health and sickness themselves. Complex psychological and socio-technological life worlds get manufactured around the technological objects. If people affected by these developments are to be made active players, they must be involved in the processes of creating these new realities. Then social players will act as experts in the everyday situations they are to be changed. That means instead of the classical laboratory in which trained experts in their own fields conduct research, we need rehearsal stages, experimental stages for the new phenomena on which subjective, social, technological, and cultural phenomena are woven together. Technology cannot really be just cut out of the social and political processes of a society. On these stages, social actors, scientists and artists and politicians have to rehearse together. On the one hand, the rehearsal stages are places of practice in which word sections are created. On the other hand, they are places of the imagination in the sense of artistic practices. The rehearsal stages are not about creating facts, but about providing a blueprint for possibilities in order to rehearse in a social process various options, ways of thinking or ways of perceiving before something actually is realized and materialized. Against this background, it becomes clear why most efforts to transmit scientific information to third parties fail. The crucial factor is making knowledge developed by experts comprehensible to third parties. There are those who know, the experts, and those who do not know, the general population. The phenomena of the Anthropocene, however, as demonstrated, demand an entirely new concept of knowledge and expertise. We need rehearsal stages for the creation of knowledge and our world, on which those affected by the development of the Anthropocene become actors, and basically we are all affected. This also applies in global terms, in that those affected by climate change are often not its cause. Therefore, and now I come to the end, I cannot read. We have to regain the cultural political space from a technological modernization which naturalizes human beings. Thank you very much.